In a small, sleepy town where nothing much ever happened, Sarah lived a peaceful life with her husband, David. The couple had recently moved into a modest house on the outskirts of the neighborhood, eager to start a new chapter together. Sarah was 6 months pregnant, and her days were filled with excitement as she prepared for the arrival of their first child. She spent hours decorating the nursery, folding tiny clothes, and imagining what kind of parent she would be. David, on the other hand, worked long hours at a local factory, quietly supporting his family while keeping to himself. He wasn't the talkative type, but those who knew him described him as dependable and kind. What no one in the town realized, not even Sarah, was that David carried secrets from a life he had left far behind. Before settling down, David had been part of an elite group of assassins, trained in combat strategy and survival. His skills were unmatched, and his reputation was feared in certain circles. But after years of living in the shadows, David decided he wanted something different. A normal life, a loving family, and a chance to escape the violence that had defined him for so long. He thought he had succeeded. Little did he know, fate had other plans. The trouble began when a gang moved into the area. They called themselves the Vipers, and they thrived on intimidation and fear. Clad in leather jackets and covered in tattoos, they roamed the streets like predators searching for prey. Their leader, Marcus, was a tall, muscular man with a cold stare that could make anyone uneasy. Under his command, the Vipers demanded protection money from residents, threatening harm if anyone refused to pay. At first, people tried to ignore them, hoping they would move on. But the gang only grew bolder, terrorizing the community day by day. One evening, as Sarah watered the plants in her front yard, a black van pulled up outside her house. Out stepped 3 men, led by Marcus himself. Sarah froze, clutching the watering can tightly as they approached her. With a smirk, Marcus introduced himself and explained that he and his crew were there to collect protection fees. If she paid up, he promised her home and belongings would remain safe. Sarah stammered, explaining that she and David barely had enough to cover their expenses. Marcus laughed cruelly, leaning closer to her. "That's not my problem," he said. "You've got till tomorrow to come up with the cash, or else." Shaken, Sarah retreated inside, locking the door behind her. Her heart raced as she replayed the encounter in her mind. She debated telling David about the incident, but hesitated. Over the past few months, she had noticed how content he seemed, free from the weight of whatever haunted him before they met. Telling him about the gang might force him to confront demons she didn't fully understand. Instead, she decided to handle it herself, convincing herself that maybe paying the fee would keep them safe. But the Vipers weren't satisfied with just money. Over the next few weeks, they returned repeatedly, each visit more aggressive than the last. They smashed flower pots in Sarah's garden, scratched graffiti on her garage door, and mocked her growing belly whenever they saw her. Once, Marcus grabbed her arm roughly, warning her that failure to comply would result in worse consequences. Sarah felt trapped, unable to escape the gang's menacing presence. Every knock on the door sent her heart pounding. Every shadow outside made her jump. Despite her efforts to hide the truth, David started noticing changes in Sarah. She seemed jumpy and distracted, avoiding conversations about their finances or why she suddenly insisted on taking longer routes during her walks. One night, as they sat together on the couch, David gently asked if something was wrong. At first, Sarah denied it, brushing off his concerns with vague excuses. But when David pressed further, looking into her eyes with unwavering concern, she broke down. Through tears, she confessed everything: the threats, the vandalism, and the constant fear that had consumed her. As Sarah spoke, David's expression hardened. His hands clenched into fists, and his jaw tightened with barely contained anger. By the time she finished, his usually calm demeanor had transformed into something darker, more dangerous. Standing up, he paced the room, his mind racing with possibilities. When he finally turned to face Sarah, his voice was low, but firm. "They won't hurt you again," he said. "I promise." Though relieved by his determination, Sarah couldn't shake the unease creeping into her chest. She had seen glimpses of this side of David before, the quiet intensity, but never like this. It frightened her, not because she doubted his love, but because she feared what he might do to protect her. David didn't waste any time. That same night, he began gathering information about the Vipers. Using skills honed over years of training, he observed their movements, noting the times they arrived and left, the vehicles they drove, and the hierarchy within their ranks. He discovered that Marcus often visited a nearby bar, drinking heavily and boasting about his exploits to anyone who would listen. David also learned that the gang stored weapons in the trunk of their van, careless and overconfident in their dominance. Each piece of information brought him closer to formulating a plan, though he kept the details to himself. Sarah, meanwhile, tried to focus on staying positive. She threw herself into preparing for the baby's arrival, knitting blankets and organizing baby showers with friends. But beneath her cheerful facade, anxiety gnawed at her. She couldn't stop thinking about David's promise and what it might entail. Late at night, she would wake up to find him sitting alone in the dark, staring out the window with a distant look in his eyes. When she asked what he was thinking about, he simply smiled and told her not to worry. Yet the tension between them grew palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the storm brewing on the horizon. The gang, oblivious to the danger lurking in their midst, continued their reign of terror. One afternoon, as Sarah walked home from the grocery store, Marcus cornered her in the parking lot. Leaning against her car, he sneered, "Your husband doesn't seem too interested in paying us. Maybe we should teach him a lesson through you." His words sent chills down Sarah's spine, but she forced herself to stay composed. "Leave me alone," she whispered, clutching her bag tightly. Marcus laughed, patting her cheek mockingly before walking away. Humiliated and furious, Sarah hurried home, determined to tell David everything. When she burst through the door, tears streaming down her face, David immediately sensed something was wrong. Without saying a word, he pulled her close, letting her cry into his shoulder. Once she calmed down, she recounted the encounter, her voice trembling with fear and rage. David listened silently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he kissed her forehead and whispered, "It's going to be okay." Then, without another word, he disappeared into the bedroom, emerging moments later with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Sarah followed him to the doorway, panic rising in her throat. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice breaking. David paused, turning to face her. "Ending this," he replied simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. Though terrified, Sarah knew there was no stopping him. As she watched him walk away, she couldn't help but wonder if the man she loved was truly capable of protecting her, or if his actions would spiral out of control. Either way, she realized, their lives would never be the same again. As David stepped out into the cool night air, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger burned within him like a fire that refused to die. But beneath it lay a deep sense of purpose. He had spent years running from his past, burying the skills and instincts that once defined him. Now those very traits were the only things standing between Sarah and the monsters threatening their lives. The gang's cruelty had crossed a line they couldn't come back from, and David knew there was no turning back. He began by revisiting the places where the Vipers frequented. Over the next few days, he shadowed them carefully, blending into the background as if he were invisible. At the local bar where Marcus liked to drink, David sat in a corner booth, nursing a soda while keeping an eye on the gang leader. Marcus was loud and arrogant, boasting about his exploits to anyone who would listen. His men laughed at his jokes, clinking bottles and cheering him on as though they were untouchable. To everyone else, Marcus might have seemed invincible, but David saw something different. Beneath the bravado, Marcus was reckless, overconfident, and predictable, qualities that made him vulnerable. David also observed how the gang operated. They moved in packs, rarely venturing out alone unless absolutely necessary. Their van, with its scratched paint and tinted windows, became a key focus for David. It served not only as their primary mode of transportation, but also as a mobile arsenal. Weapons, tools, and stolen goods were stashed in the trunk, left unguarded because the gang believed no one would dare touch them. David noted this carelessness with a grim satisfaction. It was a flaw he could exploit. Back at home, Sarah tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She busied herself with household chores, folding laundry and organizing baby supplies. But her mind kept drifting back to David. She had seen glimpses of his darker side before, the quiet intensity, the way his eyes flickered with calculation, when he thought no one was looking, but never like this. This version of David felt foreign yet undeniably powerful. Though grateful for his determination to protect her, Sarah couldn't shake the fear gnawing at her insides. What if his actions spiraled out of control? What if the violence escalated beyond what either of them could handle? One evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, David walked in carrying a duffel bag. She froze, watching as he placed it on the kitchen table and unzipped it slowly. Inside were items she hadn't seen since their early days together: knives, gloves, a small tactical, flashlight, and other tools she didn't recognize. Her breath hitched as she stared at the contents, her heart pounding in her chest. What is all this?" she asked hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. David looked up at her, his expression calm but resolute. "Just precautions," he replied. "I need to be ready." Sarah sank onto a chair, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to scream, to beg him to stop before things got worse. Another part of her understood that David's preparations weren't just for show, they were necessary. If anyone could take down the Vipers, it was him. Still, the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on her shoulders. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said finally, tears welling up in her eyes. David knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "I promise," he said softly. "For you and our baby, I'll do whatever it takes." As the days passed, David continued his surveillance, piecing together a plan that would dismantle the Vipers once and for all. He mapped out their movements, identified weak points in their operations, and studied their behavior patterns. Each detail brought him closer to executing his strategy, but patience remained crucial. Acting too soon or impulsively could jeopardize everything. In the meantime, he ensured Sarah's safety by teaching her basic self-defense techniques and setting up simple security measures around the house. He showed her how to lock doors securely, position furniture against entrances, and use everyday objects as makeshift weapons if needed. Though reluctant at first, Sarah eventually embraced these lessons, realizing they gave her a small measure of control in an otherwise chaotic situation. Meanwhile, the Vipers grew bolder, unaware of the storm brewing in their midst. One night, they decided to escalate their harassment by breaking into Sarah and David's home. Convinced that intimidation would force the couple to comply, Marcus led his crew to the house under the cover of darkness. They approached quietly, slipping through the backyard and prying open a window. Inside, the house was dimly lit, with only the faint glow of a nightlight illuminating the hallway. Confident in their superiority, the gang moved forward, expecting an easy victory. What they didn't anticipate was walking straight into a trap. As they crept through the living room, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. A tripwire David had set earlier triggered a cascade of noise, startling the intruders. Before they could react, David emerged from the shadows, moving with precision and deadly intent. Clad in dark clothing and armed with nothing more than his training and resolve, he struck swiftly, disarming one gang member after another. Chaos erupted as tables flipped, chairs toppled, and fists flew. The gang, accustomed to bullying unarmed victims, found themselves hopelessly outmatched against David's lethal efficiency. Marcus, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack, scrambled to regain control. He grabbed a baseball bat lying nearby and swung wildly, trying to land a blow on David. But David dodged effortlessly, countering with a swift kick that sent the weapon flying across the room. With each passing second, the tide turned further, in David's favor. By the time the dust settled, Marcus lay unconscious on the floor, his men either fleeing in terror or incapacitated. Blood trickled from a cut above David's eyebrow, but otherwise he appeared unscathed. His breathing was steady, his expression eerily calm as he surveyed the wreckage around him. Knowing the authorities would arrive soon, David quickly cleaned up the scene. He wiped away fingerprints, rearranged furniture, and positioned evidence to suggest the altercation had been purely defensive. Then, with a heavy heart, he dialed 911. When officers arrived, they found a battered gang leader and several injured members sprawled throughout the house. David explained that the Vipers had broken in, intending to harm his pregnant wife, and that he had acted in self-defense. Though skeptical, the police couldn't deny the overwhelming evidence supporting his story. Marcus and his crew were arrested on charges of trespassing, assault, and attempted robbery. Word of the incident spread rapidly through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once lived in fear of the Vipers now hailed David and Sarah as unlikely heroes. For the first time in months, people felt safe walking the streets without looking over their shoulders. Yet despite the newfound peace, Sarah couldn't shake the unease lingering in her heart. She knew the man she loved had saved her, and their unborn child, from unimaginable danger, but she also recognized the toll it had taken on him. The violence he had unleashed wasn't just physical, it was emotional, dredging up memories and scars he had worked so hard to bury. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy, filling their home with joy and laughter. David doted on his son, cradling him gently and marveling at the tiny miracle they had created together. Yet beneath the surface, both parents carried invisible wounds from the ordeal. David wrestled with guilt over the brutality he had unleashed, questioning whether there had been another way to protect his family. Sarah, though eternally grateful for his actions, feared the possibility of his old life catching up with them someday. Despite these lingering doubts, the couple vowed to move forward. They cherished their new beginning, determined to build a brighter future for their son, a future free from fear and hatred. Together, they navigated the complexities of parenthood, finding strength in their shared love and resilience. And though the shadow of David's past loomed large, it no longer defined him. Instead, it underscored the lengths he would go to protect those he loved most. The days following the confrontation with the Vipers were a blur of activity for Sarah and David. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate them on their bravery, bringing casseroles, baked goods, and words of encouragement. Some even offered to help repair the damage done to their home during the break-in. Yet despite the outpouring of support, Sarah couldn't shake the heaviness that clung to her like a second skin. She smiled politely, thanked people for their kindness, and tried to focus on caring for her newborn son. But inside she felt adrift. David, too, struggled to adjust to life after the chaos. On the surface, he appeared calm and collected, tending to household repairs and taking on extra shifts at work to cover the costs of replacing broken furniture. But those who looked closely might have noticed the subtle changes in him, the way his eyes lingered on shadows, the tension in his jaw when strangers approached, or the quiet moments late at night when he sat alone in the living room staring into space. He carried himself with the same stoic demeanor as always, yet there was an unmistakable weight pressing down on him. For Sarah, the hardest part wasn't just the lingering fear of retaliation from the Vipers, it was the realization that she didn't fully know the man she had married. Before the incident, David had seemed so ordinary, so grounded in the routines of daily life. Now she saw glimpses of someone else entirely, a man capable of extraordinary violence, precision, and control. These traits had saved her life, but they also unsettled her. She wondered how much of his past he had truly left behind and whether the life they had built together could withstand the truth if it ever came to light. One evening, as Sarah rocked their baby boy to sleep, David walked into the nursery. He stood in the doorway, watching silently as she hummed a soft lullaby. The sight of her cradling their child filled him with a bittersweet mix of pride and regret. Pride because he had managed to protect them, ensuring they could live without fear. Regret because he knew the methods he had used would haunt him forever. When Sarah finally noticed him standing there, she smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed her unease. "You okay?" she asked gently, shifting the baby slightly in her arms. David hesitated before nodding, stepping closer to peer down at his son. Yeah, he said softly, though his tone suggested otherwise. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic breathing of the sleeping infant. Then, almost reluctantly, David broke the quiet. I've been thinking about everything. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had avoided bringing up the topic herself, unsure of what to say or how to approach it. But now that David had opened the door, she felt compelled to step through. What do you mean? She asked cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. David sighed, running a hand through his hair as if searching for the right words. About what happened. About me. About us. He pulled up a chair beside her, lowering himself onto it slowly. His gaze remained fixed on the floor as he began to speak. You deserve to know who I really am, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Before we met, I wasn't just some guy working odd jobs. I was involved in things. Dangerous things. Things I thought I'd left behind. Sarah listened intently, her grip tightening slightly on the baby. She had suspected as much, but hearing him confirm it aloud sent a shiver down her spine. I trained for years, David continued, his words spilling out faster now, as though he feared stopping. I learned how to fight, how to track, how to eliminate threats. It was my job, my life for a long time. But then I realized I didn't want that anymore. I wanted something real, something good. That's why I came here. To start over. To be someone better. He paused, glancing up at Sarah briefly before looking away again. But when Marcus and his crew showed up, I couldn't just stand by and let them hurt you, or our baby. I had to act. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she processed his confession. Part of her had always known there was more to David than met the eye, but hearing the details made it feel real in a way she hadn't anticipated. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. For protecting us. For doing what you thought was right. David nodded, though his expression remained somber. I don't expect you to understand, he said, and I wouldn't blame you if you hated me for it. But I need you to know. I did it all for you, for this family. Sarah shook her head firmly, brushing away a tear with her free hand. I don't hate you, she said. I'm scared, yes. Confused, definitely. But I don't hate you. You saved us, David. And no matter what happened in your past, that doesn't change who you are now, or how much I love you. Her words seemed to lift a burden from David's shoulders, though the weight of his actions still lingered. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and exhaled deeply. As the weeks passed, the couple worked to rebuild not only their home, but also their relationship. They talked openly about their fears, hopes, and uncertainties, determined to face the future together. Sarah encouraged David to seek counseling, knowing that carrying such a heavy secret, and the guilt that came with it, couldn't be healthy. At first, David resisted, insisting he could handle it on his own. But eventually, he agreed, recognizing that healing wasn't something he could do alone. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, fortified by the challenges they had overcome. Still, the shadow of David's past loomed large, a constant reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond their doorstep. While the Vipers had been dismantled, rumors circulated about rival gangs moving into the area, eager to fill the void left behind. Though none of them dared approach David and Sarah directly, the couple remained vigilant, taking precautions to ensure their safety. One afternoon, while Sarah was pushing the stroller through the park, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against a tree. It was Marcus, released early from jail due to lack of evidence tying him to more serious charges. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and calculating, sending a chill down her spine. Instinctively, she turned the stroller around and hurried back, toward the house, her heart racing. By the time she arrived, David was already waiting, having received a call from a neighbor who had seen Marcus lurking nearby. "Did he say anything?" David asked, his voice tense as he ushered Sarah and the baby inside. She shook her head, clutching the baby tightly. "No, but he was watching us, like he was planning something." David's jaw tightened, his protective instincts kicking into high gear. "Stay here," he instructed, grabbing his keys. "I'll take care of it." Sarah grabbed his arm, panic rising in her chest. "No, David, please don't go. We can call the police. Please don't put yourself in danger again." David hesitated, torn between his desire to confront Marcus and his promise to keep his family safe. Finally, he relented, pulling Sarah into a tight embrace. "Okay," he said quietly. "We'll do it your way." Together they filed a restraining order against Marcus, enlisting the help of local authorities to monitor his movements. Though the threat persisted, they found solace in knowing they were no longer alone in facing it. In the months that followed, Sarah and David focused on building a new chapter of their lives. They joined community groups, attended parenting classes, and formed friendships with others in the neighborhood. Slowly but surely, they began to heal, finding strength in their shared resilience and love. Yet even as they moved forward, they remained mindful of the lessons they had learned, that peace was fragile, trust was earned, and courage often came at a cost. For David, the journey wasn't just about leaving his violent past behind. It was about proving to himself, and to Sarah, that he was worthy of the life they had created together. And for Sarah, it was about learning to accept the complexities of the man she loved, flaws and all. Together, they vowed to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united by their commitment to each other and their son. Though the scars of their ordeal would never fully fade, they served as reminders of the strength it took to survive and thrive in the face of adversity. As the months rolled by, life in the small town began to settle into a fragile rhythm. The vipers were no longer a looming threat, and Marcus's occasional appearances around the neighborhood seemed more like desperate attempts to intimidate than actual plans for revenge. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that danger was never truly far away. Every time she saw him across the street or heard whispers of new gangs moving into the area, her stomach tightened with unease. She tried to focus on raising their son, little Ethan, but the weight of uncertainty lingered like a storm cloud hanging low over their heads. David, too, carried his own burden. Though he had promised Sarah he wouldn't act impulsively, the sight of Marcus lurking near their home ignited a fire within him that was hard to contain. He spent hours sitting at the kitchen table late at night, staring at maps of the town, and sketching out potential strategies if things escalated again. His mind constantly replayed scenarios. What if Marcus decided to strike? What if another gang targeted them? Each thought gnawed at him, keeping him awake long after Sarah had fallen asleep. Despite these worries, they made efforts to rebuild their lives. They attended local events, joined parenting groups, and even hosted a small gathering for neighbors who had supported them during the ordeal with the vipers. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Neighbors praised them for their resilience, calling them an inspiration. But behind closed doors, cracks in their armor began to show. David's nightmares grew more frequent, often waking him in a cold sweat as memories of his violent past collided with fears for his family's future. Sarah noticed the toll it took on him, the dark circles under his eyes, the way he flinched at sudden noises, but she didn't know how to help. One evening, as Sarah tucked Ethan into his crib, David walked into the room carrying a wooden box. It was old and weathered, its edges worn from years of use. He set it down on the dresser and opened it carefully, revealing a collection of photographs, letters, and mementos from his past. Sarah froze, unsure of what to say. She had suspected there were parts of David's history he hadn't shared, but seeing tangible evidence of it left her speechless. "I think it's time you knew the full story," David said quietly, pulling up a chair beside her. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he picked up one of the photos. It showed a younger version of himself standing alongside several other men, all dressed in tactical gear and holding weapons. Their faces were grim, their expressions hardened by years of training and combat. Sarah stared at the image, her heart pounding. "Who are these people?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were my team," David replied, his gaze fixed on the photo. "We worked together for years, carrying out missions most people couldn't imagine. Assassinations, covert operations, anything that required precision and discretion." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "It wasn't just a job, it was a lifestyle. We lived in the shadows, always looking over our shoulders, never trusting anyone completely." Sarah listened intently, her mind racing with questions. "Why did you leave?" she asked finally, her tone gentle yet probing. David sighed, setting the photo aside and leaning back in his chair. "Because I realized I was becoming someone I didn't recognize," he admitted. "Every mission chipped away at me until I didn't know where the line was anymore between right and wrong. I wanted out, not just from the work, but from the person I had become. So I disappeared, changed my name, and started over." He reached for another item in the box, a folded letter addressed to him in neat handwriting. Unfolding it carefully, he handed it to Sarah. "This is from my handler," he explained. "She helped me disappear. Without her, I wouldn't have made it this far." Sarah scanned the letter, her eyes widening as she read the details about safe houses, false identities, and contingency plans. It was clear that leaving his old life behind hadn't been easy. It had required meticulous planning and immense sacrifice. "But why tell me all this now?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and apprehension. David hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because I don't want there to be any secrets between us," he said. "You deserve to know the truth about who I am and who I was. I can't change the past, but I can promise you that I'll do everything in my power to keep you and Ethan safe, no matter what it takes." Sarah nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. She had known marrying David meant accepting some level of mystery, but hearing him lay bare the depth of his struggles moved her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Reaching out, she placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share this," she said softly. "I won't pretend I understand everything, but I believe in you. And I believe we can face whatever comes next, together." The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. For the first time, since the incident with the Vipers, they felt like partners navigating uncharted territory side by side. David continued attending counseling sessions, working through the trauma of his past while learning healthier ways to cope with stress. Sarah threw herself into supporting him, researching resources and connecting with others who had experienced similar challenges. Together, they created a support system that allowed them to confront their fears without losing sight of hope. Meanwhile, rumors of rival gangs encroaching on their neighborhood persisted. One day, while walking home from the grocery store, Sarah overheard two teenagers talking about a group called the Shadows, rumored to be more ruthless than the Vipers ever were. Her blood ran cold as she quickened her pace, clutching the bags tightly against her chest. By the time she reached the house, David was already waiting outside, having received a call from a neighbor who had spotted unfamiliar faces lingering near their property. "Did they say anything?" David asked, his voice tense as he ushered her inside. Sarah shook her head, though her hands trembled as she set the groceries down. "No, but they didn't look friendly," she admitted. "What if they're here because of you? What if they know about your past?" David clenched his fists, his jaw tightening with determination. "Then we'll deal with it," he said firmly. "But this time we're not doing it alone. We'll involve the police, the community, anyone who can help us stay safe." True to his word, David reached out to local authorities, providing them with information about potential threats and working closely with officers to monitor suspicious activity. He also organized neighborhood watch meetings, encouraging residents to report anything unusual and fostering a sense of unity among neighbors. Slowly but surely, the community rallied around them, creating a protective barrier that made it harder for outsiders to infiltrate. Even so, the tension remained palpable. One night, as Sarah slept fitfully beside him, David slipped out of bed and stood by the window gazing out at the quiet street below. His mind raced with possibilities, each scenario more dire than the last. What if the shadows found a way to bypass their defenses? What if Marcus decided to retaliate despite the restraining order? Worst of all, what if his actions put Sarah and Ethan in greater danger? Lost in thought, David failed to notice Sarah stirring awake until she appeared beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You're worrying again," she murmured, resting her head against his shoulder. David sighed, placing a hand over hers. "I can't help it," he confessed. "Every time I close my eyes, I see worst-case scenarios playing out. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again." Sarah turned him gently to face her, her expression resolute. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "We've been through hell and back, and we're still standing. That says something about us, that we're stronger than whatever comes our way. Yes, we need to be careful, but we also need to live. For Ethan, for ourselves." Her words struck a chord deep within David, reminding him of why he had fought so hard to leave his violent past behind. He pulled her close, holding her tightly as though afraid to let go. In the weeks that followed, David and Sarah focused on reclaiming their lives. They enrolled Ethan in a local daycare program, allowing them to spend quality time together without the constant distraction of childcare duties. They explored nearby parks, took weekend trips to the countryside, and rediscovered the joy of simply being present with each other. Though the specter of danger still loomed, they refused to let it define them. Their resilience inspired others in the community, many of whom began reaching out to offer support. A retired detective offered to teach self-defense classes, while a local therapist volunteered free counseling sessions for families affected by gang violence. Even Marcus, who occasionally prowled the edges of their lives, seemed less menacing when faced with a united front. The shadow of fear that once dominated their existence began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and hope. For David, the journey wasn't just about protecting his family. It was about proving to himself that redemption was possible. And for Sarah, it was about embracing the complexities of the man she loved, knowing that true strength lay not in perfection, but in perseverance. Together, they vowed to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united by their commitment to each other and their son. Though scars from their ordeal would always remain, they served as reminders of the courage it took to survive and thrive in the face of adversity. Months turned into a year, and the town seemed to breathe easier. The shadows, though rumored to be lurking on the outskirts, hadn't made any overt moves towards Sarah and David's neighborhood. Marcus had faded into the background, his occasional appearances more pathetic than threatening. Still, life wasn't without its challenges. For Sarah and David, the scars of their ordeal ran deep, shaping every decision they made and influencing how they approached even the simplest aspects of daily life. Ethan was growing fast, his giggles filling the house with warmth and light. Sarah cherished these moments, finding solace in her son's innocence. Yet, as much as she loved watching him crawl across the living room or babble nonsense words, she couldn't ignore the lingering anxiety that crept in whenever he was out of sight. She knew it wasn't healthy to live in constant fear, but the memories of the vipers and the knowledge of what David had done to protect them were hard to shake. Each time Ethan smiled up at her, she felt a pang of guilt for bringing him into a world where danger lurked so close. David, too, wrestled with his emotions. Counseling had helped him confront some of the demons from his past, but certain triggers still sent him spiraling back to darker times. The sound of a car engine revving outside late at night would snap him awake, his heart racing as he imagined intruders breaking in. A stranger walking down their street too slowly would make him tense, his hand instinctively reaching for something to defend himself, even if there was nothing nearby. He hated feeling this way, knowing it wasn't fair to Sarah or Ethan. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't silence the voice inside him that whispered, "Stay ready." One afternoon, while Sarah was folding laundry in the bedroom, David came home earlier than usual. His face was pale, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he parked the car. Sarah noticed immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked. stepping onto the porch as he climbed out of the vehicle. David hesitated, his eyes scanning the horizon before meeting hers. "I saw them," he said grimly. "The shadows. They were hanging around the factory today." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What did they want?" she asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. David shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. They didn't say anything directly to me, but I could feel their eyes on me all day. Like they were testing me, seeing how I'd react." He paused, exhaling sharply. "I think they know who I am, or at least they suspect." Fear gripped Sarah like an icy fist. She wanted to tell him it was paranoia, that maybe he was reading too much into things, but she couldn't dismiss the possibility entirely. Ever since the Vipers, she had learned firsthand how quickly peace could shatter. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. David's expression hardened, his protective instincts kicking in. "We're not doing anything reckless," he said firmly. "But we need to prepare, just in case." Over the next few days, David implemented new security measures around the house. He installed motion sensor lights in the backyard, reinforced the doors and windows, and set up a hidden safe room in the basement where Sarah and Ethan could retreat if needed. He also reached out to local authorities, providing them with detailed descriptions of the gang members he had seen and urging them to increase patrols in the area. Though the police assured him they were monitoring the situation closely, David knew better than to rely solely on others for protection. If the shadows decided to act, he would have to be ready. Despite his outward confidence, David struggled internally. Memories of his old life resurfaced with alarming clarity, forcing him to confront parts of himself he had worked so hard to bury. He found himself revisiting the wooden box of mementos more often, staring at the photographs of his former team and wondering if leaving had been the right choice. Had he traded one kind of violence for another? Was it possible to truly escape the life he had known? Sarah noticed the change in him. He became quieter, withdrawing into himself during the evenings when they should have been enjoying family time. One night, after putting Ethan to bed, she confronted him. "You're pulling away again," she said softly, sitting beside him on the couch. David looked up, startled by her words. "I'm just trying to keep us safe," he replied defensively. Sarah shook her head, placing a hand on his knee. "I understand that, but you can't shut me out. We're in this together, remember?" Her gentle persistence broke through his defenses. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to open up, sharing his fears and doubts without reservation. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be free of this," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Free of the violence, the guilt, the constant feeling that something bad is about to happen. It's exhausting, Sarah, and I hate that it affects you and Ethan." Sarah wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly. "You're not alone in this," she reminded him. "Yes, your past shaped you, but it doesn't define you. What defines you is how far you've come, and how much you've sacrificed to give us a better life. Don't forget that." Her words brought tears to his eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "for believing in me, for staying with me." Their renewed connection gave them strength. As tensions in the neighborhood began to rise, reports surfaced of break-ins and vandalism in neighboring towns, attributed to the shadows. Local businesses started closing early, and parents kept their children indoors after dark. The sense of unease spread like wildfire, infecting even those who had previously felt safe. David and Sarah doubled down on their preparations, ensuring they were as ready as possible for whatever might come next. Then one fateful evening, the storm finally broke. Sarah was in the kitchen washing dishes when she heard the faint crunch of gravel outside. At first she thought it was just a neighbor passing by, but then the sound stopped abruptly, followed by an eerie silence. Her pulse quickened as she dried her hands and peeked out the window. Standing in the driveway were three figures, their faces obscured by hoodies and bandanas. One of them held a crowbar, tapping it idly against his palm. Panic surged through Sarah as she backed away from the window. She hurried to the living room, where David was playing with Ethan on the floor. "They're here," she whispered urgently, her voice shaking. David's expression shifted instantly, his playful demeanor replaced by steely determination. Without hesitation, he scooped Ethan into his arms and ushered Sarah toward the basement. "Go to the safe room," he instructed firmly. "Lock yourselves in and don't come out until I say so." Sarah hesitated, torn between fear and the desire to stay by his side. "Be careful," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. David kissed her forehead, his touch warm despite the coldness in his eyes. "I will," he promised. Then, with a final glance at his family, he turned and headed upstairs, grabbing a baseball bat from the closet as he went. Upstairs, David moved with precision, dimming the lights and positioning himself strategically near the front door. He listened intently, his senses heightened as the intruders approached. The sound of glass shattering signaled their entry through the back window. David waited, his grip tightening on the bat as footsteps echoed through the house. When the first figure stepped into view, David struck swiftly, catching the man off guard and sending him sprawling to the ground. Chaos erupted as the remaining intruders scrambled to respond. Fists flew, furniture toppled, and shouts filled the air. David fought with a ferocity born of desperation, knowing that Sarah and Ethan's lives depended on him. Despite being outnumbered, his training gave him the upper hand, allowing him to incapacitate one attacker after another. By the time the dust settled, all three men lay unconscious on the floor, groaning in pain. Breathing heavily, David called the police, explaining the situation and requesting backup. Within minutes, sirens blared in the distance, growing louder, as officers arrived on the scene. As they handcuffed the intruders and loaded them into patrol cars, David stood silently, his body aching, but his resolve unshaken. He had done what he had promised, protected his family at all costs. When Sarah emerged from the basement, clutching Ethan tightly, she burst into tears upon seeing David unharmed. She threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. "You did it," she murmured, her voice muffled against his chest. David hugged her back, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We did it," he corrected gently. "Together." In the aftermath, the community rallied around them once more, offering support and solidarity. The Shadows, having lost several key members, retreated from the area, their influence waning significantly. Life slowly returned to normal, though the memory of that night remained etched in everyone's minds. For Sarah and David, it served as a reminder of their resilience and the lengths they would go to protect the people they loved most. As they tucked Ethan into bed that night, Sarah glanced at David, her heart swelling with pride and admiration. "We've been through hell," she said softly, "but we're still standing. That says something about us." David nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It does," he agreed. "And as long as we have each other, I know we can face anything." Together, they vowed to build a brighter future for their son, a future defined not by fear but by hope, love, and unwavering courage. The months that followed the confrontation with the Shadows brought a fragile sense of calm to Sarah and David's lives. The gang's retreat from the area felt like a turning point, not just for their family, but for the entire neighborhood. People began to venture outside again, hosting barbecues and block parties as though reclaiming their streets from the grip of fear. Yet, beneath the surface, the scars of their ordeal remained fresh. For Sarah, for David, and even for little Ethan, who seemed to sense the weight of his parents' struggles in the quiet moments when laughter faded and tension lingered. David tried to immerse himself in normalcy, throwing himself into work and spending more time playing with Ethan. He built a small sandbox in the backyard, where he would sit for hours helping his son pile sand into tiny buckets or chase after bubbles. To anyone watching, it appeared as though David had finally found peace. But Sarah knew better. She saw the way his eyes darted toward unfamiliar cars driving by, the way his body stiffened at sudden noises, and the way he sometimes paused mid-conversation, lost in thought. These were the subtle signs of a man still haunted by his past, a past that refused to let him go completely. Sarah, too, carried her own burdens. Though she was grateful for the safety they had fought so hard to secure, she couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were forever marked by what had happened. Every knock on the door made her heart race. Every stranger lingering too long outside their house sent her mind spiraling back to the night the shadows broke in. She hated living this way, constantly on edge. But she also understood that letting her guard down entirely wasn't an option. Not yet. Maybe not ever. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah sat on the porch swing with Ethan nestled against her chest. David joined her a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of tea. They sipped in silence, listening to the crickets chirp and the distant hum of traffic. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt almost normal. Almost. "I've been thinking," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the quiet. David glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "About?" he prompted, his tone gentle. Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "About whether we're doing enough for Ethan, I mean. We've worked so hard to protect him, but is that really enough? What kind of life are we giving him if we're always looking over our shoulders?" David set his cup down, leaning forward slightly. "You think we should leave?" he said, his voice neutral but tinged with understanding. Sarah nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't want to raise him here, David, not like this. Not in a place where danger feels like it's always waiting around the corner. I want him to grow up somewhere safe, somewhere he can run outside without me worrying about who's watching. Somewhere we can breathe freely." David didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared out at the horizon, his jaw tightening as he processed her words. Moving had crossed his mind before, but he had dismissed it, convinced they could rebuild their lives right where they were. Now, hearing Sarah articulate her fears so plainly forced him to reconsider. Could they truly stay in a town that reminded them daily of the violence they had endured? Or was leaving the only way to give Ethan the future they both dreamed of? After a long pause, David sighed deeply. "If that's what you want, if that's what's best for us, I'll make it happen," he said finally, his voice firm despite the ache in his chest. "But it won't be easy. Starting over again means leaving behind the support system we've built here. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Sarah wiped away a tear, nodding resolutely. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I'm more scared of staying. If we don't do this now, I don't think we ever will." Her determination struck a chord within David, reminding him of why he had fallen in love with her in the first place, her strength, her courage, her unwavering belief in a better tomorrow. With that decision made, the couple began making plans to relocate. They scoured listings online, searching for a small town far removed from the chaos of their current life. After weeks of deliberation, they settled on a quaint community nestled in the mountains, known for its tight-knit residents and low crime rates. It wasn't perfect, no place ever was, but it offered the fresh start they desperately needed. Packing. Up their belongings proved bittersweet. Each box filled with memories of triumphs and trials alike. The nursery decorations Sarah had painstakingly chosen during her pregnancy, the dented coffee table overturned during the Viper's break-in, the wooden box containing remnants of David's past. As they loaded the moving truck, neighbors stopped by to say goodbye, offering hugs and well wishes for their new chapter. Though saying farewell was difficult, there was comfort in knowing they were leaving behind friends who genuinely cared about them. On the day of their departure, Sarah stood in the driveway holding Ethan close as David double-checked the straps securing their furniture to the trailer. Her gaze swept across the house one last time, taking in the chipped paint on the front door and the flower beds she had tended so lovingly. Despite everything, it had been their home, the place where they had faced their darkest days and emerged, stronger because of it. "You ready?" David asked softly, stepping beside her. Sarah took a deep breath, nodding. "Yeah," she replied, forcing a smile. "Let's go." The drive to their new town was long but peaceful, the scenery shifting. From bustling suburbs to rolling hills blanketed in green, Ethan slept soundly in his car seat, oblivious to the significance of the journey. Sarah watched the landscape change through the window, her mind drifting between hope and apprehension. Would this new place truly offer the sanctuary they sought? Or would old fears follow them, no matter how far they ran? When they finally arrived, the sight of their new home brought tears to Sarah's eyes. It was smaller than their previous house, but charming in its simplicity, with a wraparound porch and a large backyard perfect for Ethan to play in. Neighbors greeted them warmly, introducing themselves and offering help unloading the truck. The first time in years, Sarah felt a flicker of optimism, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, they might find happiness here. Over the next few months, they settled into their new routine. David found work at a local garage, while Sarah joined a parenting group where she quickly formed friendships with other mothers. Ethan thrived in his new environment, giggling as he chased butterflies in the garden and learning to take his first wobbly steps under the watchful eyes of his parents. Life wasn't without its challenges. They still had moments of anxiety, still woke some nights drenched in sweat from nightmares, but the weight of constant fear began to lift. One crisp, autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, David and Sarah sat together on the porch watching Ethan toddle around the yard. "Do you think we'll ever forget?" Sarah asked quietly, her gaze fixed on their son. David shook his head, reaching for her hand. "No," he admitted, "and maybe we shouldn't. Those experiences shaped us. They taught us how strong we are, how much we're willing to fight for each other. But forgetting isn't the same as healing, and I think we're getting there." Sarah leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Me too," she whispered. Together they sat in silence, savoring the quiet beauty of the moment. For the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to believe that their story wasn't defined by the pain they had endured, but by the love that had carried them through it. As the seasons changed and years passed, the memory of the vipers and the shadows became less like open wounds and more like faded scars, reminders of battles fought and won. David continued attending counseling sessions, finding solace in sharing his journey with others who understood the complexities of leaving a violent past behind. Sarah threw herself into volunteer work, channeling her energy into helping families navigate similar struggles. Together they created a life rooted in resilience, hope, and unconditional love. Ethan grew into a curious and adventurous child, eager to explore the world around him. His laughter echoed through the house, filling every corner with light. Watching him play, Sarah and David often exchanged knowing glances, silently acknowledging the sacrifices they had made to give him this chance at happiness. Though the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, they faced it with unwavering determination, united by their shared vision of a brighter future. In the end, their story wasn't just about survival, it was about redemption, about choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and family above all else. And as they stood side by side, watching their son chase fireflies under a starlit sky, they knew they had made the right choice. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. Because in the end, that was all that mattered.